Good evening and welcome to DH Sparks. This week we are talking about social media and how it's moved from being just a platform for friends to share updates to a ready and perhaps willing tool for propaganda. Our panelists today are at the forefront of fighting fake news, hate speech, and championing freedom of expression on social media and online. So let me just go ahead and introduce the panel for you. We have as moderator Gurshabad Grover, I'm sorry. He's stepping in for Sinha, who could not make it today due to unforeseen circumstances. Our next panelist is Mishi Choudhary from the Software Freedom Law Center. She's a technology lawyer and an online civil liberties activist working in the United States and in India. And we also have Pratik Sinha from Alt News. He is one of the co-founders of one of India's leading fact-check sites. So let me now hand over the session to Gurshabad.
Thanks so much, Avinash. We're today having a really timely discussion on social media companies and how they are affecting the exercise of rights online, elections, democratic practices around the world. And of course, our focus perhaps maybe on India today. To say the least, it has been an eventful couple of weeks. First, of course, came the Wall Street Journal story on how Facebook's hate speech rules were colliding with Indian politics, as the headline states. And through interviews of current and former employees at Facebook, the story is revealing how decisions made by the Indian policy team at Facebook have contributed to hate speech remaining on the platform. And of course, there was this Time story today, again, sort of implying a similar narrative. Stories like these of disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, and in fact, for the last couple of years, disinformation on WhatsApp leading to violent mob lynchings. So for the past year or so, it seems like every story has come with this heavy weight. And as the sort of poster for this event also stated, I think many like me grew up with a childlike fascination and optimism for what the internet will do for democratic participations and forms of knowledge production. And in some ways, social media companies have sort of fulfilled that promise. But when we think of the last few years, the perception has been very different. When we think of social media, we think of several related phenomena: privacy violations, surveillance capitalism, amplification of hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, abuse of dominance in with respect to their particular markets, etc. And of course, so in this discussion, we'll also try to focus on you, the user. So before we take it to the panelists, we have this poll question queued up for our viewers on Zoom. And those, unfortunately, on viewing this from Facebook or YouTube won't be able to answer it, but please feel free to share your thoughts on the chat there. Zoom participants will be able to see this poll now, which is, personally, what have you done when you have come across, let's say, hate speech, disinformation, or fake news online on social media platforms or messaging platforms? Have you intentionally shared it? Have you reported it using the features on the platform? Have you ignored it, or have you responded to it? So this poll is open, and we welcome your answers. And now, of course, let's take it to the two esteemed panelists we have, which we're very lucky to have to be hearing insights from. So Pratik and Mishi, thank you so much for joining us. And perhaps to kick off the discussion, we can start with, and I hate to use an ailment-related metaphor while we deal with the pandemic, but when it comes to social media companies, do you agree with the symptoms I've highlighted, and are there more? And if yes, what are the causes behind this? So, Mishi, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Gurshabad, and thank you everybody for joining. Pratik, we have only interacted virtually, and I think this is just another extension, but thank you for all the work you do. It's an important and integral part of not just this story, but every other narrative which plays out where technology is concerned. Gurshabd, there are so many symptoms, and I don't know what the actual disease here is, but I would just lay a few points which might set the context of what I think on this entire issue. I think the first thing I want to say is that the controversy over this content moderation at Facebook, at least for now, has descended into personalities, and that eclipses the larger and more important issues. Perhaps also both government and industry like the fact that it has descended into this, and our eyes are taken away from what the larger issues are. The second thing I want to say is that a very important part of this story is that beginning in the 1990s, the US government, as well as the young, powerful tech firms, they started to promote non regulation and also the American style freedom of speech as essential to the growth of the internet. This approach assumed that authoritarian states they would just crumble in the face of digital networks which had American constitutional values built into them. And the internet was this great vehicle which would spread US civil and political value systems that more speech is better, that would mean better platforms. It will also means that there would be democratic revolutions all around the world. So why I say this is that in the very beginning of my career, in the space when we were setting up sflc.in in around 2009 and we started to do this work, I was very amused that a lot of people would say I have First Amendment rights in India, and I would say, do you know what the First Amendment of Indian Constitution is? Those are the reasonable restrictions, because everybody thought that at the American First Amendment was our free speech rights online. That speaks to the success of what was happening. And then also it started Arab Spring, etc., where the platforms were used to at least mobilize some kind of movements, which is, as this was said, it was not all just nice pictures or games, etc., but it was also going to be used for political speech. But everything starts great, and then the governments catch up. Somebody said a while back that India and the US are watching the same reality TV show. US is just 2 seasons behind. So when the attention was paid, obviously because the 2016 elections happened, but we had been yelling and screaming for a very long time that India is the petri dish. The weaponization of the platforms for political purposes had already happened. But the companies, because they're based in America, and those were the value systems which they had decided to spread out. That's why a lot of policies and most of the things are also made from that lens. The third thing I'm going to say is India is now a very important market. The US market is saturated. The Indian market is still growing. We only have right now around 500 million people who are online, but our population is much larger, younger, and also a hungrier population for a lot of knowledge and tech and everything else. 400 million users on WhatsApp. The current investments by a slew of companies in Reliance Jio is an important aspect of all of this. So that just points to why India right now is a place where everybody's eyes are. These are just the beginning of what I wanted to say, but I will say is that the social media platforms, they do enable the users to publish their thoughts and emotions directly. And they have also now become the largest and most influential media companies on the planet. So it's not the same story. I am the free speech wing of the free speech party, where this tiny, everybody feel good, like the free basics, as if Facebook was only formed for the little guy and Ganesh's billboards were everywhere. It's no longer that. It has metastasized into something very big. And not it, I meant the social media platforms. And it's not just one company. They are also now tightly oligopolizing the digital advertising market, which means that can only happen with large-scale privacy invasions. These privacy invasions are directed at consumers who make the product and the content basically on the platforms, and whose every breath, every movement online, the platforms have arranged to spy on to feed into that cycle. So that's the context I will set up, and I'll let Pratik add his insights and experience.
Thanks so much. And Pratik, just to as we were discussing this, I think the poll results are ready from the question we asked, and I love your take on the response as well, as you answer the questions of what are the symptoms and uh, uh, sort of the causes of these symptoms. And of course, one aspect is the users, and from a very small survey, it seems like almost 53%. So 53% of the users have ignored sort of hate speech, disinformation, or fake news online they have encountered it, and only about 35% have reported it when they saw it. Uh, so, is this consistent with what you've seen, especially with your, of course, your unique vantage point as having established a fact-checking organization?
I'll get into that in a second. But first, thank you, Mishi, for giving that overview, especially this global overview, as to, what the proprietors of these organizations were thinking when they started these thing, and, the American First Amendment and everything. And that is very important because that also shows, I was having this discussion with Gurshabad just before the call started, that one of the main issues, problems that ail right now is that people sitting in California who are controlling these companies, whether it is Facebook, whether it is Twitter, whether it is Google, they don't understand politics that is happening elsewhere. The most recent example would be that of Cambodia, where this monk, who's according to all the reportage that has been put out, is a major dissenting voice. And what the government did, officials of the government, they created this video where it was shown that he's having sex with 3 women, and he's supposed to have taken a vow of celibacy. And Facebook let that video be there on the platform for a very, very long time. And by the time they took it down, it was already too late, and he had to leave the country. And this is not the first time when somebody has had to leave the country. We have had all of Rohingya Muslims who had to, a massive exodus which happened because the military apparatus in Myanmar, they used Facebook as a platform to put out organized hate against the Rohingya Muslims. And the same thing is happening in India, where there's organized hate being put out against minorities. And, I want to sort of highlight a conversation that I heard where Zuckerberg came on one of those American channels. I forget which one, I think it was MSNBC. And the issue was of mail-in ballots, where Donald Trump put out certain tweets claiming that mail-in ballots are essentially, fraudulent. And Twitter went ahead and fact-checked those and put out a disclaimer that not only they hid the tweet, I mean, you could not see the tweet without actually explicitly clicking that I want to view this tweet, but they also put a disclaimer that this is misinformation and provided links as to why this is disinformation. At the same point in time, Mr. Zuckerberg was asked why did they not take action, because Trump had put identical content on his Facebook page as well. And Zuckerberg's response was that political speech is highly scrutinized already, and which is why they don't want to fact check politicians, and which is why they are not fact checking Trump on what he said. Now, the problem with these organizations like Facebook, Twitter, etc., these are global organizations. They make global policies. Their policies are not specific to a certain country. And when Mr. Zuckerberg says that they are not going to fact check political speech because it is already overly scrutinized, that is a very narrow worldview. Because yes, there may be a Washington Post and a New York Times and a CNN in the US, and there may be Guardian and BBC in UK, not so much BBC, but those organizations are scrutinizing political speech of the political leaders. But in India, when it comes to Mr. Narendra Modi or Mr. Amit Shah, there's nobody who's ready to even touch their political speech. Forget them. What we see day in and day out, for example, even the fact-checking organizations which are associated with Facebook, if you look at whether they have fact-checked Mr. Amit Malviya, whether they have fact-checked Mr. Sambit Patra, I think other than Boom Live, nobody has fact-checked them. Or if they have fact-checked them, it is once or twice, just when there's a especially egregious incident where they cannot avoid fact-checking. But otherwise, they are not fact-checking. So when it comes to fact-checking political speech in India, when it comes to power brokers, people don't do it. And Mr. Zuckerberg's stand that political speech is already overly scrutinized, it shows a very narrow worldview. It's a very American view where they don't see what is happening in the rest of the countries and how misinformation and hate is actually ruining democracies across the country. So I think that is the first ailment, that is the first problem. And in continuation with that, they also do not understand how democracy works in different countries. It doesn't work the same way in different countries. When you talk about ease of business, Facebook at the end of the day is a corporation which is out there to make a profit. And in this case, when it comes to India, if you want to, for such a big corporation, I'm not talking about chota mota organizations, small organizations, for an organization that is size of either Twitter or Facebook or Google, if they have to survive in India, it's pretty clear now that they have to cozy up to the government. You see that with the Ambanis, you see that with the Adanis, and all these big corporates who have, who completely side with the government on every viewpoint, or who never even dare to put a word that might upset the government. And that is what is happening. The recent controversies vis-a-vis Wall Street Journal, etc. That is what is playing out. It may be possible that there are individuals inside these organizations who have certain biases. And I agree to your point that we are focusing too much on the individuals, but these individuals are also a function of, these individuals are there not by chance. These individuals who have a certain
Hi, we're not able to hear you, Pratik. Or is that just me?
No, I thought I also lost Pratik
Okay.
when
Yeah.
he said these individuals are, and then that was the last thing I heard.
Yeah. Sorry, we're unable to hear you, Pratik. We'll just wait for you to get back. And till then, I think on this problem itself of it becoming a personality issue rather than a systemic, like an analysis of the systemic problems that ail the industry, I think it is a result of the lack of rule of law, to put it very bluntly, where companies feel they have to, as Pratik said, cozy up to the government in order to function and maintain their business interests. And in other forms of tech regulation, like we see when TikTok got banned in India and versus when action against it is now being taken in the US, clearly TikTok is complying with the government here. They have not filed a litigation against them in any court, whereas the actions are pretty similar. In the US, you see the entirely opposite. TikTok immediately filed a lawsuit. And I think this is a great example of how older problems like just the lack of rule of law are still affecting technology regulation. And also the fact that, of course, as Pratik said, democracies are functioning very differently.
I think he's back. So you want to check?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead with whatever you. I'll come back in once you're finished with the discussion.
No,
Yes. Please come in, Pratik. I was finished. Please continue your point.
Right. So so the problem is that democracies work very differently, and in India, at this point of time, if Facebooks, Googles, and Twitters of the world have to continue doing business, they have to cozy up to the government, and that is why they are making certain decisions. And where the problem of these individuals who are appointed, who do lobbying on behalf of these organizations with the government, and they are the same individuals who are also deciding whether certain speech should be flagged as hate or not. So this inherent contradiction, that is a big problem. So it is mainly two-part, that these social media companies have a narrow worldview, especially the leaders. They do not see how their decisions are affecting other democracies, especially authoritarian regimes, and the fact that doing business in India today means cozying up to the government, and that is what is leading to what we are seeing today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I think on the point of the role these companies are playing and continue to play, and I think uh, structurally, of course, you've pointed out a problem that the policy teams that regulate what content stays online are the same teams that are supposed to be acting as liaisons with the government in terms of regulation and policy. And another sort of problem that was highlighted by the Times story today was uh, sort of indicating that these companies lack the diversity of the populations that they are in as well, right? Even when Facebook responded to the Wall Street Journal story, it defended itself by saying, of course, we're adapting to the local scenario where since 2018, we have included caste as a protected group when it comes to hate speech. And they phrased it as a defense. To me, it seemed like you did that in 2018 when India was possibly your largest market already. The third sort of aspect is, of course, and Pratik, you mentioned the case of Myanmar and hate speech against the Rohingya, which I mean, that transparency about that story, actually, some of it came from Facebook's own audit of their processes and sort of admission of their participation. So I'd love to hear from both of you, and Mishi, we can go to you first on what these for example, given the recent stories, do you think like a human rights audit of what has happened in India in the elections and otherwise will help? And what are the other things that, let's say, the Indian policy teams or these companies should themselves be doing in order to address these problems?
I have also heard a lot about the human rights audit call for them, but that was also made to the committees who are hearing it. But we also have to understand that that's not the power or within the power of the committees. An important point which I will say is that we acknowledging the fact which Pratik had laid out about ease of doing business. Or the facts where you were saying that the government relations people are the same as the policy people. Even if they were not the same, we are not sure whether there's going to be a guarantee of a Chinese wall between those people. For example, in the United States, Joe Kaplan, who was also heading the public policy, and his support for Brett Kavanaugh was pretty well known. And there have been recent stories in this very month about his influence, about how, whether the conservative pages, whether they were removed or not removed, what was his influence on that? So that's one part. The second part about the human rights audit or something, as I said, we'll have to see in whose power such an audit lies and what it would actually reveal. There are certain global networks like the Global Network Initiative, which carries out its audits, etc., for a very long time. The first thing is that if we are going to provide also a business environment where the government's interference is minimal, then we can't also say that we want more government whenever there is an issue and we want more regulation. So the tendency, and somebody like me who's a lawyer, I love laws. And it would be great for us to have more laws, more lawsuits that makes everybody more money or something. But if I am wearing my hat as a civil rights activist, and I am also seeing that this is a great way that large companies, large platform companies are the only ones who can afford it and implement certain systems. And it is also a great way to send a lot of documentation thrown at you. The transparency reports, they give a lot of quantitative data. They don't give us qualitative data. We are all reacting right now because these stories are giving us qualitative data. You can actually point to instances which didn't happen. But if we were to open the transparency reports, which is also their way of saying we are self-regulating, then there is a ton of data. Why this is a very complicated issue also is that although the governments are constantly using their influence as well as the regulations, which we as the citizens think, why isn't the government coming up with more law? They will come up with more law. There have been amendments which have been in India also introduced saying this is to check misinformation, or it's always to protect women, right? Because we don't have our agency. We always need some guardian, whether it's the state or somebody else to protect us, or it's at this time it was to check misinformation. But what we've seen that is mostly used for political censorship or to further some kind of a corrupt system of politics. And therefore, from my point of view, and Gurshabad, what you said, that systemic problems are now surfacing. Just because we have social media, just because we have smartphone, that doesn't mean that our structural problems have gone away. The problems of our courts are in existence. The problems of delay, how the courts decide which matter is picked up when, all of those exist. The second thing I will say is, even when there is law, the companies now have done two things. For a long time, the companies used to play the game of Lex Loci server. Every time you would ask something, Twitter or any of these various other platforms would say, my servers are in California, I can't give you any of these details. Now, if you're a user, there are two things you think about. First, you think about maybe for a crime, they are supposed to share it. And why aren't they doing it? Which is what the line a lot of time the police would take, or the government or the state arguing is taking. But if you're also an activist who is persecuted by your own government, you actually like the fact that these people are not sharing your data with your state. Look at the WhatsApp scandal. I know in India, there's so many stories that we quickly forget everything. But the WhatsApp Nso scandal is still alive because there's a case going on in California. So activists, 114 people in India, lawyers, activists, they're all spied upon by their own government, which is under an obligation to protect them against spying from outsiders, protect them and subject their own spying to rule of law. I understand that there are reasons sometimes a government has to spy on people, but that is subject to regulations and rule of law. In our India, surveillance has no oversight, no judicial oversight, no parliamentary oversight. It's only executive oversight. It's like I will only check my own papers and then give myself an A+ grade. So, coming to thing, what I was saying was that because now technology has permeated every aspect of our life. So all the problems which have been existing and we haven't solved, they are not going to just go away because we think we can quickly go and express our emotions online, because the mainstream media will pick up our emotion and make it as a primetime story that night. That doesn't solve problems. Hard problems are hard. This problem is hard. There is no clear, quick, find out this solution and then everything would be fine. There was a 66A. What was it used for? It was used for putting teenage girls behind if they were expressing their opinion about a traffic jam when a political leader dies. When a political leader's son, his corruption came into light. This, I'm not talking about the current government. I'm talking about the UPA government. 5 a.m., the police go and pick up the person from his home and arrest when he had just tweeted about the fact that the XY minister's son was corrupt. There are instances of cartoonists who were beaten up, who were booked under sedition. This is what the law was used for. So as much as I like law, and the problem is that our law enforcement is not very efficient, even for very egregious rape and other kind of crimes, we've taken forever. For tragedies, we've taken forever. And so this is why our legal system is a great, we feel that there is a lot of solace in why doesn't the government enact something, but we also have to be careful. The history shows it will be used for political censorship. B, the problem is it is going to take forever. Tech is 2 steps ahead of government and law or regulation, and law is always 2 steps behind. So by the time law catches up, anyway, facts have been made on the ground. So as much as I like this entire idea and we want to solve the problem, my way of looking at it is, that's why I said the larger issue of surveillance capitalism, the capture of advertising industry, the fact that the more we outrage, the more we react on a platform, the better the platform actually learns from our behavior, the better the micro-targeting of the political advertising is. Look at the numbers of which political party is spending how much on Facebook. There's a Times story yesterday that if you think that Donald Trump is not going to win November 2020, then you are not spending enough time on Facebook. There is an Indian story about which political party has the largest amount spent on advertising on Facebook. But that is why it is so closely tied with how they make money and why they pretend that hate speech has no business being on their platform, but they continue it for so long. Twitter only just found its conscience somewhere, and that only for labeling. So as much as we like, but these little pats on the back don't really work. And I will say, Twitter has immunity, but Mr. Prashant Bhushan's case, Twitter goes to court. It could have just said, I'm an intermediary. But in order to get a pat from the Supreme Court, the Twitter says, oh, I have also removed these 2 tweets. That was user-generated content. You get your immunity because you have no editorial control over that. But you still went ahead and removed those tweets when you were not under any legal obligation to do so. You did that. So all I'm saying is that why I continue to insist that it is a larger question is because the platform's business model is tied with all of these things. The more you outrage, the more XYZ TV guy comes up, the more you react, I react, we tweet, we retweet, and then share, the better the platform becomes. And that is why we see this trepidation, this hesitation each time in taking actions for things for which to you and me would be very obvious. And anybody would go ahead and could take an action. So if the policy teams have a Chinese wall or not, we do not know. Whether that would actually resolve this problem or not, we do not know. Whether law will not be used in a particular purpose, we know about that. And that is why we have to get a little bit, zoom out a little bit, and also understand that there will be things which we might have to do differently than just thinking about it in a traditional thing, in a reactionary manner to each story as it comes out. I don't think these stories are ever going to stop. And I don't think it is limited to one platform. I would also like to know, what are the Indian platforms doing? They might be smaller, but then how do they moderate content? We are constantly being told that Indian companies are better for us than the foreign companies, but then we also have to subject them to the same kind of rules, regulations as with law.
Thanks, Mishi. And I think that perfectly sort of elucidates the role of both private companies and the state in this, and a lot of state inaction on acting on these issues, perhaps. As we've seen, data protection laws are, if not to address the monopoly part of the problem we see with social media companies, at least they address some part of the abuse that they have after sort of invading into our privacy. We've been waiting for that law for so long. We are consumers of social media companies, yet our consumer protection laws do not address our relationship with these companies. We're still waiting for competition law reform so that we can sort of not deal with monopolies and oligopolies in this space. So I think thank you for that detailed response. And then I'd like to take the same question to Pratik about what you see as the role the state and private companies can play in the future to address the problems that we've just discussed.
I think Mishi has made some great points, wonderful points. I think there's not much left for me to say, but uh, but two things I would like to add. Number one, I would like to say, because we are talking about Myanmar and everything. One, we have to see, you know, how all these platforms, only act based on pressure. They don't act because they are altruistic or anything. And the simplest example would be about 4 days ago when this account, when this person called Hindustani Bhav put out a video on Instagram saying that anybody who offends Hindus, it is time is out. And now this is a person who came on Big Boss, so he's a fairly known figure. And he put out a video that if anybody who offends Hindus and says anything against Hindu gods, then time is out. Keep the system aside, keep the police complaint aside. Let's go and beat them up. Okay. And this video, the person had some 3.3 million followers, and or 1.3 million, I forget the number. But this video stayed on his profile for over 24 hours, and it wouldn't have been taken down had there been not a huge amount of outrage. And then they took another 24 hours to take down his Facebook profile. And if you see in Myanmar what happened, it was only later on, much later on, after all these media organizations reported what was Facebook's role, that they finally grudgingly acknowledged that, okay, we did play a part in the exodus that happened in Myanmar. So what we have to realize, and again, the point that Mishi made, that this is not specific to one single platform. Every platform is doing the same thing. That is, they only react to pressure. They might have certain policies on paper, but they don't implement those policies. If it is, especially when it comes to important people, especially when it comes to people in power, they don't implement those policies. And that is because these quote unquote celebrities that have come out of social media, they're very important for social media companies to keep going. They are the ones who are churning all this content, which gets millions of viewers. Why does it take 24 hours for Facebook to realize that somebody saying that let's go out and beat people is hate speech? The reason why it takes 24 hours is because this person produces so much content and has millions and millions of views. And this happens again and again with different celebrities. So, the way they execute their policies is very, very much dependent on who the individual is. Is this individual a famous person? Is this individual a politician? Or is this individual a general nobody in the society? It is not uniform implementation of the policies. That is number one. And number two, what we have to realize is that at the end of the day, the only way to break these monopolies, the government has no interest in breaking these monopolies. Neither, not a single government in India. I know some politicians in the US have spoken about breaking down Facebook and breaking down Google, but let's say in India, not a single political party has acknowledged the fact that these companies have become too big and they cannot be moderated anymore. Their economies are equivalent to certain countries, and that they have this overarching power. So we have to also acknowledge that and look for solutions, look for decentralized solutions. The decentralized solutions out there are not the best, but we have to start talking about these, because people, just like back in 2017 when alt news started, people did not know much about misinformation. At this point of time, people don't know much about privacy, but these conversations are very much important so that people know what is the alternate. People keep asking, how do you save yourself? How do you protect yourself? For example, from a privacy standpoint, Google Chrome has such a huge market, but not enough people use Firefox, which has much better quality control in terms of, if you use Google Chrome, automatically use a Google account, you give a lot of content to them. But when you use Firefox, it has a default setting of, this regulated, how much data you want to share. That these conversations also need to happen, where people find out how to act in this world where these monopolies exist and what to do to fight these monopolies. Not enough of that conversation is happening.
Thanks so much, Pratik. And I think both of your interventions sort of highlight how that there is something to be feared when this problem is taken to the state, and therefore sometimes having to resort to user action ourselves, right? And some of the problems we've discussed, in fact, have been noticed by the state, right? In December 2018, when the Ministry of Electronics and IT released the intermediary guidelines which regulate social media companies, etc. They in fact take a more authoritarian approach to online content, and um, the resultant harm to freedom of expression in India would have been massive, because they let mandate things like traceability on end-to-end encrypted platforms like WhatsApp, and therefore they want each message to be attributed to users. And the second thing was, of course, mandating automated content filtering of all sorts of unlawful content. And therefore, I think that's a positive note to end on. And I think, Mishi, yesterday you co-authored an article in Times of India, which also tries to make this exact point, that users can sort of take back control in terms, and you've been, of course, a free software advocate for so long. And so with sort of entering the tail end of the panel discussion, and we'll go to the questions in a few minutes. But I'd love to hear sort of concluding thoughts and some questions that we should ask ourselves, and some immediate solutions if you have any. And of course, Mishi, please go ahead.
I think the most rewarding thing in my life has been, in terms of my work, is to have represented and worked with a lot of free and open source software communities, without which even these companies would not exist. That's why we do work with these companies quite a lot in terms of the software they are building, which is the raw materials and the basic blocks. And I think that's where the answer also lies. The way out of this swamp is improved social policy based on a better understanding of the internet. Most often than not, we are told that the technology governs us. We are not the ones who will have the governance of technology. That's why the freedom aspect of free and open source software is far more important than just looking at the code, which is the open source aspect. These centralized oligarchs of social media are unnecessary technical contrivances, not facts of nature. The internet was built for federation, not centralization. There was a time, and I'm aging myself, but it is not really aging, because only 2007 the iPhone came, but when everything did not have an app. And we did understand how various other things work. There were other experiments, but we all went towards centralization. But internet was made for federation, and that meant anyone can offer services like social sharing to anybody else. Anyone can have a web server to share chat, videos, pictures, and online experiences. When I talk about this, I am not telling people to stop using or being happy about the fact that you can post pictures, you can talk about makeup tutorials, or you can express free speech and expression in terms of what your politics is. People have found a voice for so many marginal groups that there are great things. We can take all of that. And as Pratik said, certain things right now may not have been perfect, but there are pro-IT humanity solutions coming up. And the more the customer demands that I need my privacy, I need control. Don't give me all this consent where I have to scroll and I accept, or the government has an exception to everything, like our current data protection bill does. Or don't give me this semblance of anything which is so confusing. I want clarity and simplicity. I'm a customer. I like to put my pictures on for my family and friends to look at. I would like my email to have spam filter and unlimited storage, etc. But I don't want to be subject to all this surveillance. The more we demand, the better it would be. That's why we do not need Zoom. We can use Big Blue Button. We can use Jitsi, which is what sflc.in uses all the time. And Big Blue Button is being used by Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, IITs, Deeproot Linux, which actually provides training, and we are working on them to understand what it is. We don't need even Zoom-like startups who are going to surveil the communications for ad data or any other purpose. Governments want to, or at least need to, foster federated service based on free software ecologies. What I would like to say is, it's like people like CIS or people like sflc.in or Pratik's organization, Alt News. The more we brings sunlight, the more we simplify these things and don't keep it to a certain small esoteric group of people who can pretend that we know a lot, the better it would be, because technology is for everybody. Currently, in our circumstances, disease is not our only fear. Unless we are vigilant now, even as we are put under so much additional strain by the pandemic and its human consequences, but unless we are vigilant now, we shall also live through the death of freedom. And I don't like to say all these big words only if I didn't mean them, but you're also watching what is happening when tech is rolled out and what it actually does. And so that.
Thanks so much, Mishi. And uh, even growing up, I don't think we all have to look uh, too much back into the past to know what interoperability is, for instance. I think everyone who used Yahoo Messenger, Google IM, they actually worked on open protocols and open standards. And at some point of history, they've made a deliberate choice to close these platforms, even while continuing to use these open standards. So WhatsApp, for instance, is the same story. It used an open protocol called XMPP, but decided to not federate. They have deliberately made these choices to gain a market share. And um, I think it's also time to look at these technical mandates as uh, options for the state to, let's say, dismantle these monopolies, etc. So I think that's a positive point to also lead and users on, because we sometimes are cynical that we are not able to push the state into doing anything, or private companies into doing anything. But of course, there are certain things that we can do ourselves to not only safeguard ourselves, but also our communities, and promote more control over the things that we use and operate. Pratik, again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the same question.
Yeah, so I think what I would want to end with is two things. Number one, um, uh, the according to me, the what we need to do go forward is, number one, realize that what Facebook, Googles, and Twitters of the world are, and we have to continue pressurizing them to act in a certain way. The pressure that, like, for example, whatever this Wall Street Journal article did, or whatever reportage did, it brings certain amount of pressure, and that kind of activism needs to continue. They need to be kept in check. But at the same time, we need to realize that it is not in their business interest to be in check. They will always want not to be in check. Their whole profit model is around creating these data silos. Everything is an app, just like Mishi pointed, creating this data silos, and using that data to make profit out of that. That is, at the end of the day, that is a business model. And knowing that that is a business model, we need to look for alternatives. While keeping this pressure on these organizations, we need to look for alternatives where we have to go back. You were talking about XMPP, Jabber, etc. used to use XMPP, but if you go back even more, email is the most beautiful form of decentralized communication. You could be sitting anywhere in the world and you could send each other an email without being, doesn't matter whether you're on Yahoo, whether you're on Gmail, whether you have an AOL account, or whether you have an IceNet account. That was a protocol, which was an interoperable protocol, and which has been there for a very long time. Now, can you, with a Facebook login ID, comment on Twitter, or can you, with a Twitter ID, comment on YouTube? No, they have closed all these organizations, and they are now private data silos, to the point that now one important aspect of web, that is URL, the uniform resource locator, even that they are doing away with. So, for example, for a lot of things like apps like Hello, etc., these Indian apps, there's no URL to say that, for example, me as a fact checker, if I had to say that there is this particular misinformation on this app, I don't have a way to say it, because there's no way to locate that information, because these are data silos which have broken all protocols. Internet was supposed to be, you should be able to point that this is where something is there on the web. They don't follow those protocols at all. So we have to look for alternatives which follow these centralized protocols. There are, as Mishi said, yes, they are not the best solutions out there. For example, Mishi spoke about Big Blue Button. Even we use Big Blue Button. We don't use Slack. we use Matrix. Matrix is this open source software, federated software, which is an equivalent of Slack and much better in my opinion. So we are starting to use this different options, and more needs to be spoken about this. There are different organizations which are doing good work. Snowden's organization, I forget the name, they are doing good work in this area. So there are multiple organizations which are talking about free software and how it is essential for the internet to survive, for free software to prosper. And that is the second thing where we have to look for, that is decentralization, federation, and free software. Those are the solutions to break these monopolies. You cannot expect state to do much. The state and these private companies are working together, and they don't want that ecosystem to be disturbed. And that is why we have to look for these solutions, which are, while we keep pressurizing the state and these private companies as to how to act and what is expected of them, we have to look for alternatives, because it is not in their interest to act properly.
Thanks so much. And I'm glad we're ending on a positive note in that the solution already exists and is in fact the basis of the internet that we all use. The internet is based on open protocols that anyone can deploy and use. And it's great to see that the solution also lies there, rather than thinking that we are facing entirely a novel problem in that sense. So thanks so much, Mishi and Pratik. What we'll now do is go to the question and answers part of this discussion. And just before we do that, participants on Zoom who joined us through Zoom, there's also another poll Deccan Herald is sharing with you that should be on your screens now. And for our viewers that are on YouTube and Facebook, the question relates to where do you see like the problems we've discussed, and immediately where do you see the onus lies in priority, the government, the companies and users. And I think in this panel discussion, we've all sort of discussed various aspects of this, and it's about where you see the current priorities. And this poll is open for a few minutes. Would love your responses. And let's just go to the question and answer section now. And of course, Mishi and Pratik, please feel free to jump in if you'd like to answer this question. So this is from Shreyasi Dastidar on YouTube, and they ask, hi, is there any study or survey to find out what percentage of Facebook users in India consume news through Facebook, and what kind of news gets more eyeballs on Facebook? So I think I've seen a paper by the Pew Research Center that talks about news consumption in the US, where I think the figure was around 40% a few years ago. So this is slightly outdated, but would love your thoughts on how you see the news consumption ecosystem on social media, Pratik and Mishi.
I'm not familiar with any study which gives us actual clear numbers in India about news consumption. So unless Pratik knows, so I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I haven't come across any study either. But what we have to know is that, how we even define news, because news has taken a different narrative. Because in India, the propaganda, there are two things. One, mainstream media in India is already doing a bad job, but whatever it is doing, let's say there are some organizations, there's a constant attempt to say that these are the bad actors. So a lot of forwards will say that, it will say in Hindi that mainstream media is not going to tell you this is the news. Okay, so how do you define news? That is also a question. So they'll put out that this is what happened. Muslims went and attacked Hindus in this and this area. Mainstream media is not going to tell you. You have to. This is because they are sold off. This is what has happened. So how do you even define news anymore when it is a very difficult definition? So I don't know how a body who is going to look at this and create data, how do they define news? And the data will be based on that. So I don't think there is a clear definition of news anymore, because news is essentially a form of information, right? It's a packet of information, And I don't know how these organizations, when they do their surveys, when they do the data collection, what is the basis that they use?
Thanks, Pratik. The next question we have is from Taksha on YouTube, and they ask, speaking about America, they have someone like AOC who is skilled in social media, knows its powers, and uses her power to question Zuckerberg. But that is not the case with our politicians, right? And so this is, I mean, just a relevant fact for the Indian scenario is that in 2014, Anki Das, who heads the public policy team at India, in fact, wrote a piece complimenting the use of social media tactics by the BJP and how it contributed to their electoral success. So that's the closest example I have. But off to you, Mishi and Pratik. What do you think about this question? Yes, please go ahead, Pratik.
I want to add one more point, because you're talking about Ankitas. She wrote this piece on Mr. Modi's website, narendramodi.in. The other person who wrote a piece on Mr. Narendra Modi's website is Mr. Tukral. So the two biggest people in Facebook India have actually authored pieces on the Prime Minister's website. That itself speaks for something, you know. But go ahead, Mishi. What do you think?
I mean, I have the benefit of going between two jurisdictions, so I can get the benefit when AOC is putting out the show here. But I will say, so first of all, I think that hearings in India are not public. That's a major problem. I have deposed, or my organization, sflc.in, has sent representatives to several of these, whether it's the IT committee hearing or everything else. These committee hearings are not public. They're held in secret, and the public is entitled to know what is going on. The second of all, I will say is that politicians themselves, so my father would say, and I have mostly I try to use him as my sounding board, that if I can explain technology simply to my father or an issue, then I can explain it to everybody. And a judge once in the US told me the side that wins in a technology case is the side which explains it simply and does not complicate it. So my father is around 70 years old, and I think if I can explain it to him, I can explain it to the Indian Parliament, because then a lot of people will understand it. But what I want to say, he said to me when I was explaining this issue, and he said, "Arey Mishi, is hammam mein to sabhi nange hain." Because everybody is involved in some way or the other. The politicians or the political parties are also a little hesitant to take everyone into account, because you pick up the political parties and there is some kind of information everywhere which is happening. I think that the BJP definitely used social media much better than that time the ruling party of UPA, but they've also tried to catch up. And instead of actually making and using it to spread information, one from what you are doing or actually engaging, this has become one kind of capturing of the narrative, and one politician going after another politician. And that's why you see that the committees also are hesitant, or they will issue certain questions. Some things are happening, but the public never knows what happens. And then there are reports, but what happens to a committee report? Do we make any changes? Nothing. The questions are raised. I would really like to know, and I'm quite keen to know, what is happening with the WhatsApp scandal. What is the follow-up there? We have short memories, and that's why the politicians are also fine. When there is a little bit of news, there's a brouhaha, and then we forget about it. So it is, as you rightly said, it is a chance for a young politician to come and say things out. But unlike the US, which is a bi-party system, but each party also has its own wings, in our parliamentary system, we have lost that art of debate. And everybody is just repeating whatever the party line is. There are some excellent speakers. We have seen some speakers. I have watched a few of them who have articulated it, who have said a few things, but then they try, but I don't know where it actually leads to. And I do think that there are some speakers in the opposition right now who are trying, but I'm not sure where it is going. I am hoping that the IT committee has some excellent members, and they will have a hearing which is public, which is what Delhi government's Peace and Harmony Committee just did. They had a public hearing, and again headed by a young politician, Mr. Chadda. And so the IT committee should have a public hearing. They should invite all platforms, including the Indian ones, because we should also also appreciate the fact of what Gurshabad you were saying. If rule of law has to happen, then it has to happen for everybody. It doesn't have to. Please come. The argument that a Chinese company has to be treated differently, an Indian company has to be treated differently, an American company has to be treated differently in terms of how data is taken care of or all these issues are addressed is not going to continue for too long. People are not going to continue to buy because you're an Indian company. You are not actually, you're going to be more honest, or you're giving me a better product. If you have a good product and you're also abiding by certain regs and regulations, and you're protecting your customer, and you're putting people in the center, then it would be great.
Thank you so much. And I think even the recent events sort of reflect that, where after the Wall Street Journal story broke out, I think some of it devolved to a BJP Congress matter where politicians were accusing each other of, and in fact, the bias in content moderation issue, as it's usually put, has been an issue that has been raised by both BJP and Congress. So often BJP politicians and activists complain that these platforms are biased against right-wing content. So clearly, both of them want some sort of accountability mechanism, but unfortunately, due to the devolution of the debate into the BJP Congress dichotomy, I think we haven't arrived at that yet.
I also want to add one more thing that, something that has not been, so we are looking at Facebook privacy, etc. What is happening in India right now is that, for example, in Delhi, at least 3 people I know, Professor Purvanand, Umar Khalid, and another Professor Prashant Pandey, they were called by the police for questioning, and they took away their phones. It's completely illegal, without any warrant, nothing. They took their phones away just because they went there for questioning. And talking about how AOC is raising issues in the US, there's so many issues in India which are just not being raised, where there's clear violation of privacy. You walk into a police station and you come back without your phone, which very often, I'm very careful with my phone. I don't use my phone as a data device. I don't store private stuff on my phone, but not everybody is aware. And you're like a walking, talking, when you have that phone, all your personal photos, all your personal moments, everything is in that phone. And now police can just ask you to give away your phone, or whatever the circumstances are going to be. But nobody brings up this issue. So because you're talking about AOC bringing up this issue, the problem is that opposition parties in India, number one, some of them are probably too old to understand the issue. They don't get it. And in general, there's so much bureaucracy even within the parties that even somebody who's younger, if he or she wants to raise this issue, usually they're not allowed to. So it is a big problem that there's no political voice who is able to have a coherent debate without it and whoever brings it up, it gets into the slinging match, as you pointed out, about BJP versus Congress.
Yes, thanks so much. And of course, arbitrary state action is sort of hindering activists and politicians both to speak their mind and be dissenting voices. And as Mishi said, this was clear in the NSO Pegasus case, where despite the fact that the action was probably illegal, and a colleague and I had argued that in the Indian Express, that not just due to the fact that there are no surveillance safeguards in India, according to the Information Technology Act, that the act of hacking phones seems illegal. But out of the so many journalists and politicians that were allegedly targeted, no one has actually challenged state action. The Indian government hasn't denied using it. Similarly, I think today marks 2 years of Sudha Bhardwaj being in jail. So I think we're of course, we at the same time sort of need to keep the state in from abusing their powers. So the next question we'll take is from a Zoom user, Tushar Meshram, and will they be able to join us on voice, or should I read out the question? Oh, here you are. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. So my question is, does it matter to social media companies if, say, well-known personalities have to shut off their accounts, if they have to close their accounts because of trolling? Does it really matter to them?
Thanks, Tushar.
I think I can speak from the Indian perspective. The Indian perspective, I don't see anybody well known shutting off their accounts despite trolling, because for them, for those who are, let's say, the ones who are trolled massively are also the ones who are fighting a certain battle, their own battles for the society. For example, let's say Rana Ayub. She's probably the most trolled person, but she's also trying to fight her own battle. So it is not an option for many people to go offline, because that is unfortunately, because these places have become monopolies. It is not that if you leave these places you have no way to express yourself. That is the danger of monopolies, right? So I don't think in India there's anybody who's like leaving platforms, at least people who are well known. There are people who are sort of taking back. I think Shaila Rashid does not post so much on Twitter, or does not take so much active participation because of the amount of trolling they go through. And one must notice that here there are two Muslim independent women who are the biggest troll subjects in India. This is something that one must take note of. But I think some people do, might reduce their participation. But if you are in the field of social activism or anything to do with society, it is almost impossible to sort of pull yourself back completely, because these places have become monopolies and you have to participate in them. It is just the way what is happening with Geo. One day we will all end up with a Geo phone because every other telecom partner is going down. And then you have to talk about Geo, but at the same point use Geo. I don't use it yet, but I see that day coming one day.
Yeah, thanks. And we have another question on Zoom, and this is perhaps for you, Pratik, which is, does fact checking exist as a career option in India? And if Joydeep Das Gupta can join us on voice, we'll let them speak their question as well. Okay, I'll just read out the question then, which is, since in order to run a fact-checking agency, what should be the business model? And we'll be grateful if you can throw some light on that.
See, my view need not be the universal view. I have a very specific view because I'm coming from a certain worldview. But at this point of time, yes, fact checking is a career option. Because there are so many fact checking bodies that have come out, but it's a very limited career option. What does a career mean? You have an expectation of certain amount of money, etc. For example, at Alt News, we unfortunately we are able to pay only so much to the people who are working with Alt News. But because Alt News has the certain inbuilt activism mode, there are more people who are coming, and we are a not-for-profit organization that gets people to join us. And again, we have a very small team. We're just a team of 11 people at this point in time. Most of the fact-checking bodies are 5 to 6 people. So I don't know what defines a career, but it is not something that that a lot of people are going to get jobs in. But even if they do, for example, PIB recently went to different colleges, Press Information Bureau went to different colleges and hired a few people. But at the end of the day, they are not fact-checking. What they're doing is they are delegitimizing very genuine media reports. They are just saying that this is fake, this is fake, this is fake. There are other organizations who are fact-checking within their bounds. They are fact-checking certain things which don't have much of a political impact. If you ask them to fact-check something, an individual who is rather popular, they shy away from fact-checking those things. So fact-checking is a form of journalism. So the question is journalism a viable career thing right now? Yes, it is, but it depends on where you get a job. If you get a job in Republic, would you call that journalism? That is a broad answer, but fact checking itself is still a very small niche. There are not many organizations who are invested in it. Because it is politically inconvenient to fact check. Whatever you fact check is the organizations which are fact checking there. Most of them are fact checking in this very narrow margin, and yeah, that is the reality.
Thanks. One more question. This is from Nitin Krishna on YouTube, and this is directed towards Pratik. But I'll actually expand the question and pose it to both of you. So this question is, how do you see the media scenario in Karnataka and Kannada TV news? But I'd actually like to expand this question to an aspect that perhaps we didn't get to in the discussion, which was about the role of the so-called traditional media and how it's interacting with the problems we discussed on social media and online platforms. And just as a disclaimer, by traditional media, I do not mean necessarily more credible in that sense. I mean, we have seen the sort of nature of TV news and TV debates in India on prime time even. And after the recent central elections, we also saw outlets like News Laundry had covered how much Hindi newspapers and Hindi TV channels had contributed to, let's say, hate speech towards Muslim and targeting of minorities, etc. So I think this is sometimes a refrain in other countries, that we need to empower the traditional media to tackle some of the problems that we discussed with respect to social media companies. But would love both your takes on this question. Mishi, would you like to go first?
Sure. I actually don't know much about the Kannadiga media, so personally, but I do know that there are some interesting things which I follow, like Dhanya's outfit about the News Minute, which is an independent outfit that has come up with a bunch of things. There is from the Northeast, there is East Mojo, which does work. There is News Click, which covers a lot of things which other people will not cover. So I will say that there is a ton of, or not ton, but there are some interesting independent media organizations which are coming up. And there is at least a little more uptake in terms of being bootstrapping even a smaller organization which does some substantive work and is not very does not have a TV channel or is slick enough to have all those fantastic things which a richer new channel has, but they have great content. And so those are interesting. I don't have a TV and I don't watch Indian news ever. And I think that is only to keep my own sanity. So, so whatever I read about them from the papers or etc. is not very pleasant, and I highly recommend that because I don't think that's news. That's just some circus which is injurious to everybody's health. I think they should all come with that kind of a health warning. I will say that an interesting thing which I have seen is that whatever is trending on Twitter or perhaps one of these social media, the channels, the primetime channels, take their hints from what the story should be instead of doing actual journalism. If something is trending on Twitter, does not mean that it actually has any real credibility or sensibility. Memes are created the way we all know who live on the internet, how they are created. Trends can be created. And it's really unfortunate that they take that they take what the story should be from social media rather than going out and where the stories are actually happening on the ground. That's not to say that a lot of people are not using social media to amplify even these smaller outfits which I talked about. Some of them are able to reach a large number of people only because they can have a YouTube channel or something else. But that's to my limited knowledge that more vernacular and more substantive work and independent work, even in vernacular. Just because it vernacular does not mean it's always going to be accurate, or it will not pander to one kind of community or discriminatory content or misinformation, etc. So the more we can encourage independent media, the better it would be. And this Pratik can speak to better than I can. But mostly don't believe one source. Just go and check a few other places to see where whatever you think you are consuming from.
See so the question, what do I think about what's happening in Karnataka media? Now, this is actually a wider question I, as an individual, speak 4 languages. I speak English, Hindi, Gujarati, and Bengali. And those are the languages that I understand. Now, to figure out what is happening in Karnataka, I need to be able to speak. One of my colleagues, Zubair, he does understand Kannada because he lives in Bangalore. So some of it we are able to monitor. My general view about vernacular media is that, number one, for independent, because the question of business model came out, alt news is majorly funded through individual donations, but it also must be noted that we are catering to the English speaking audience. We do have a Hindi website and it is doing quite well. But catering to an English speaking audience means that we are also catering to a certain economic section of the society. And generally, it is considered the ones who speak English are probably, if you take the average, they have a higher per capita income. So it is possible to get more donations if you're catering to that population. Now, if you're catering to a population that speaks, let's say, only Kannada, only Marathi, only Gujarati, then their average per capita income will be less. So to have an independent media which caters to a specific language becomes all the more difficult. So which is why what you see is, again, the problem of business model, that the media organizations which exist are all which are following the same business model, that advertisers pay in money and they are the ones who are supporting the channel, and then the advertisers decide what content goes, and the government makes sure that the advertisers are ensuring that certain content doesn't go on media organizations. So in general, the problem of the media model that India has, it is not specific to any one organization. It is across the board, and it is very difficult to have independent organizations, independent media, when there isn't the ability, or either ability or the awareness that there's a need to support independent media. In case of alt news, over 3 years, for example, the last 1 year, or at least the last 6 months, if you look at the average, the amount of donations that we are getting is enough to cover all our salaries. So if we didn't have a grant, right now we do have a grant from a body called IPSMF. It is a partial grant. It is not 100% grant. It is a small grant, but we do have a grant. But even if we didn't have the grant, we would still be able to sustain ourselves. But the question is, will a media which caters only to one language, let's say just Kannada or Marathi, will they have enough donations coming in to be able to sustain themselves? I think it could be a problem. And I know organizations who have tried but have failed. So the problem of what business model a media organization should follow in a country with low per capita income is going to be a very difficult problem to solve.
Thanks so much, Pratik. And that sort of concludes our question and answer section. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions. And we also have the results of the second poll that we had sent to users. And I'm personally glad to see these results. There is no silver bullet to all of the problems we've discussed today. So, but I hope all the viewers and listeners benefited from the insights of Mishi Choudhary and Pratik Sinha, who are, if you're not already following their work, I strongly urge you to do so, because as I have, you will learn an immense amount in a very short time. Any parting thoughts, Mishi and Pratik?
I think we spoke already a lot, but all I will say is that I think that by demanding better products from companies and keeping our own government accountable, if you can do it yourself, then encouraging or at least supporting the people who are doing it, standing by the people who are keeping others accountable, and making those informed choices in our use of technology, remembering that it is now permeated every part of our life: health, finance, personal lives, education, especially during the pandemic where we are all negotiating our lives behind these screens. We can build a better and a juster society than these large giants where the fat cats make the deals with the governments would ever let us have. And I would say is that putting science at the disposal of the people is an aspiration from India's past that should be central to its future.
Thanks so much, Mishi. Pratik, please go ahead.
Um, what I would like to say is that, and this is something that this realization has come after 2 3 years of work. Number one, that it takes a very long time to understand these things. Whatever point of view I have, till 6 years back, I was only a software engineer who didn't understand anything. I mean, okay, I understood a few things because my family, my parents have been activists all their lives, but I understood very little as compared to what I understand now. And
very unlike an
my,
Indian software engineer. You are claiming that you don't know something.
So, my life till 6 years back was this happy-go-lucky guy who wanted to travel the world and, just have a good life. And I think, this awareness that I have gotten, what I realize is that number one, as individuals, if we empower ourselves, there's a lot that we can do. And because the state is failing us, because the corporations are failing us, because the system is failing us, it is very important for individuals to empower themselves through this reading. That is all I do. I read a lot. That is one thing that I do. That is how I form my worldview, by looking at what things, and Mishi said, read multiple sources. It is very important that you empower yourself. You are in a much better position. It is not necessary that your final opinion would be right, and there's nothing called a right opinion, but you'll be in a much better position to form an opinion if you have inputs coming from multiple sources, whatever you read. So that is one thing. And it is necessary to read what is happening around the world. It is necessary to, if somebody, today when the US government wants to say that Snowden is a traitor, there are many people in the US who realize that he's not. But in India, if somebody is called an anti-national, it is very difficult to get rid of that tag, right? But so that awareness in the society is very important. And if the government or the state is not willing to provide that awareness, it is you as an individual to seek out that awareness, because that is what is needed for the future of the society. Because now it is up to collectives of citizens who have to put in their towel and say, like, look, it is also my responsibility. I'm going to spend this 1 hour post-work trying to empower myself to understand these things and ask better questions, ask questions of the right people, and be more critical about the things that are happening around us. So yeah, that is what I think we should be doing.
Thanks so much, Mishi and Pratik. Thanks to all the viewers who joined us on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook. And Pratik and Mishi, I mean, as always, thank you for sharing your expertise and insights. I think you both left us on two very, very positive notes. So I certainly feel inspired to do more. And hope all the viewers feel the same. And of course, we're going through a pandemic. So take care of yourself. And if you have the energy, we have all these great suggestions from Mishi and Pratik. Yes, and thanks to everyone at Deccan Herald for organizing this, Ruma, Payali, Avinash. That's it from our end. So thank you so much for joining, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for educating me. And thanks, Avinash, Piyali, and also Ruma. And thank you, Pratik and Gurshabad. I'm very glad I was here.
Same, I was very glad here. And thank you to everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.